So I'm Josh Stella. I'm the CTO and co-founder of a company called Fugue. And what we do at Fugue is cloud security. My background is a combination of national security and high tech. Let's see if we got this. Okay, so so prior to founding Fugue, I was at Amazon Web Services working largely in like DoD, IC space. I've been doing this stuff for a very long time. I'm really a developer by background, not a CISO track kind of guy. And I love the talk we just heard about and just the whole DevOps movement. I'm old enough that we didn't used to have ops teams. It was kind of the total ownership model with just a big Unix box instead of the whole cloud. But you had to do everything. And this gets back to ownership. And what I'm going to talk about today is the ownership of security, which in the era of the cloud falls on everyone who is engineering the system. How many folks here do development or engineering in cloud? Awesome. This should work then. Okay, we're going to do a few things. I'm going to go over an overview of cloud misconfiguration risk. Most of it's going to be me sitting at a terminal breaking stuff, and then if there's time for Q&A, we'll do that. Okay. What we mean by cloud misconfiguration, and this is what we live and breathe at Fugue, is getting cloud resources configured in a way that is dangerous, that is vulnerable to exploitation. And I'm going to show you just how clever the bad guys are being. The simulation I'm doing, by the way, is a recreation of a real hack that happened, a famous one. But last year, Fugue did a survey of 300 organizations operating at scale on the cloud. So this 93% is from that survey. So 93% were concerned for major security breach due to misconfiguration. I'm glad it was that high. The 7% that are missing are probably the ones that are soonest going to be exploited, because everyone is susceptible to this all the time. Gartner, Neil McDonald, nearly all successful attacks on cloud services are the result of customer misconfiguration, mismanagement, and mistakes. That sounds pretty accusatory. Having worked at AWS and built a lot of stuff on clouds, I agree with it. You're not seeing the attack vector being somebody sneaking onto the Amazon or Microsoft data floor and sticking a thumb drive in a server. That's extraordinarily unlikely to happen. It is things like what I'm going to show you in a minute and what our survey respondents and again, this made me happy. 66% said the number one risk was identity and access management. I believe that is true. And I believe it's true because IAM is actually a network in the cloud. It's an alternative to the TCP IP network, and I'm actually going to use that and exploit it in this hack. Second highest, security group rules, firewalls. Also correct. Third, object storage access policies. Now, I think a lot of people would think, you always hear about S3 being left open to the world, right? That's the big mistake everyone makes. I don't believe that's true. I think most of the time people are stealing data out of S3, it's because they're exploiting overly permissive security group rules and the IAM network to get to the S3 bucket and steal data. And then encryption in transit disabled. So if you feel confident about your S3, that's great, but you have to understand it in context. Same with RDS or anything else. All right, so a lot of these misconfigurations are overlooked. And there are reasons for this. Most of the exploitations that I see in the real world, one of the fun parts of my job is every time there's a major breach, that there's any like DOJ report or anything like that on, I'm immediately trying to recreate it in my sandbox and figure out how that bad guy did that. And what I've come to learn is that most of the things they're doing to attack cloud surface are not recognized as misconfigurations by security teams. The kind of scan and report tools that have been out there for a while on cloud are nowhere near good enough to tell you really how these bad guys are doing this. So a lot of these things are overlooked and sit out there because the security team does not recognize it. They're not considered policy violations by compliance frameworks. So if you're thinking about if you have to use like CIS or NIST or any of these, they're going to tell you some things. But they're not going to tell you usually if you're vulnerable to these cloud native exploits because they're really different than in the old days of the data center, where you could have TCP/IP-based perimeters and monitoring of network traffic and so on. That doesn't help you in cloud for the most part. So this is why in most enterprise cloud environments, these are sitting out there. So it's interesting. This says before cloud and cloud, and that's probably roughly right calendar-wise. I'm not sure it's driven by the cloud. It's probably helped by the cloud. But so in the old days, and this, by the way, still happens, the kind of classic Hollywood hacker narrative is, I'm going to go after, Red Ventures. I would never do that. And I'm going to target them and try to break into their network, or go after Sony. The North Koreans actually did do that. They targeted Sony. They didn't like a movie, and they wanted to hurt them. And they would identify the target organization and then start poking at them for surface to exploit, often human, right? This is like your spear phishing stuff, things like that. Mostly what we're seeing now is not that at all. Mostly what we're seeing now is automation that bad guys are using to look for any misconfiguration on anything that has a public IP address. So a friend of mine is a kind of central to reporting on these kinds of things and tracking them and helping create CVEs and so on. And he told me the average length of time that an IP address or DNS record, anything public, appears on the internet and it has been scanned for vulnerabilities is probably about 7 minutes. So when you're sitting there at the console and you've turned something on, you say, well, I'll lock it down later. Within 7 minutes, somebody knows, most likely, if you've misconfigured it and it's gone into some database that they're keeping, and then they come back from their day job and they look through and they say, oh, I like that organization. That looks good. I think I'll now go use that vulnerability to get in. So they're actually assembling shopping lists of vulnerable organizations and then choosing from them. And it happens very, very quickly, and it happens with automation. And that's why you need to automate this stuff yourselves. Okay, I'm gonna walk the high wire here and do some live hacking. So first I'm gonna describe, come on screen. Oh, PowerPoint has decided it owns the screen here. Let me take that out of display. I'm not a big PowerPoint guy, so. There we go. Okay, this is a little bit of our actual product Fugue. What I'm showing you here is a diagram of a cloud configuration. And over here on the left is the internet, going through a gateway into an EC2 instance. You can see this is set up for this demo. It's saying, I've got a CVE, right? A CVE is a known vulnerability. My job, though, as the bad guy, so because this EC2 instance has a CVE, there's a way in. So a CVE might be something like a vulnerable version of a web server or a misconfigured WAF, right? So I've identified that. I'm going to get onto this EC2 instance, but who really cares, right? If I get onto some, especially if you're doing stateless servers, I want the data in this S3 bucket, and I want to steal it. So that's the narrative here. Does this make sense so far? Okay, let's get to a terminal. Now, I've got a CVE on this box, but I'm not going to do a CVE exploit in front of you because AWS are really good at watching for people doing that, and they will lock me out of my cloud account if they notice me doing that. So I'm going to pretend that I'm doing that, so please bear with that part of it. And I'm just going to SSH into this EC2 instance. Okay, so the first thing to notice here, check my time here, we're out of date right here on our patching. So one of the things that I see over and over and over again in these cloud breaches is it happens that the launch pad is EC2 or a container that has been forgotten about. How do you forget about stuff? You forget about stuff when, we have customers with hundreds of thousands of these kinds of components. And this is one of the reasons we like visualizing them. So you say, what's that network doing? But anything you've forgotten about on the cloud and you think it isn't your problem because the way the cloud works, maybe it's in other teams, it is your problem. And very often the bad guys are finding things just like this to break in. Okay, the first thing, I said I wanted to steal data at S3. Is the text large enough? Do I need to make it larger? Someone in the back, can you read it? You're good? Okay, cool. So the first thing I'm going to do, I know this is an Amazon Linux instance, it says so. So I know it has the AWS tools involved. So I'm going to see if I can look at S3. Okay, somebody did their job right. I cannot list S3. I cannot see S3. So the reason for this is this EC2 instance, and I'll show you this in the AWS console. Let's go at a full screen here. I'll show you this right here. This EC2 instance is running under an IAM role. So this is back to that IAM configuration and IAM being a network. The EC2 instance has the permissions of that IAM role. And therefore, this EC2 instance has this maintenance role, which apparently is configured to not allow access to S3. So good on the DevOps team for getting that right. All right, so I'm not done, though, if I'm a clever bad guy. But before I get into the actual exploit, I want to show you something you may have read about in the news, which is the metadata service. And a certain CEO salesman from the Bay Area, whose company's logo is red, likes to get on stage and say, Amazon lets you see all of the access keys to everything. And the press has reported this too. It's really unfair. So what I'm doing here is I'm looking at what's called the metadata service. So if you have an EC2 instance running, it has a hypervisor, right? It's a virtual machine. And that hypervisor knows things about that compute instance, about that EC2 instance, and I can go access that metadata from the EC2 instance. So here I'm just running a simple command, which is a curl. I'm just hitting a REST endpoint at this special IP address for the hypervisor, 169.254.169.254, and I'm looking for the latest metadata. And this will just give me a list of the kinds of stuff I can see. Looks like I'm a little off the screen, but I think it'll still work. So I want to see specifically the actual credentials for that EC2 instance. So here I'm going a little deeper, latest metadata IAM security credentials. All right, there I print out maintenance role. We saw right in the console it was maintenance role. Well, as the hacker, I can't see the console. So I'm going, okay, this thing is running in some IAM role called maintenance role. Cool. Here's the part that a hacker probably really wouldn't care to do because it's meaningless, but the press makes a big deal out of. So now I'm going to go inside of those security credentials of the maintenance role. Oh man, that looks scary. There's a secret access key in there. It's the access key and the secret access key. Keys to the kingdom, right? No. These are the credentials that did not let me look at S3. Okay? So if you get your configurations right around the configuration of the resources, the metadata service is your friend. You know, one of the #1 vectors for breaking into stuff, and we saw one happen last year actually to a cloud security company, where they found credentials on a local volume rather than using it from the metadata service, which automatically rotates at high frequency. Some old volume sitting there, I think it was actually a backup of a volume. They had put the secret key and the access key in it, not rotating them, entire database got stolen. So this is your friend, and it really doesn't matter if a bad guy can get this if you've got the permissions for it locked down appropriately. Okay, now, I am thwarted on seeing S3. So I have to try a different approach. And this is where I'm saying IAM is like a network on cloud. So I know that I can't get to S3 at all in the maintenance role, so I want to see if there's any other roles laying around that might have access to it. So here I'm saying AWS, again, the AWS command line. This time I'm addressing the IAM service. Last time I tried to do an S3 list, this time I'm hitting IAM for a list policies. And yes, you'll notice that AWS commands are very inconsistent. In S3 it was ls, and this it's list policies. And then I'm going to do a grep, which is like a search, looking for anything with S3 in it. Okay, so that role does have the ability to look at IAM and list roles in IAM. And I see one here that looks attractive to me, which is S3 read-write. That sounds like what I want to do. Okay? So, now I have to see, I mentioned that my EC2 instance is associated with an IAM policy. Oh, I got my copies and paste wrong. See, I told you I'd make a mistake at some point. All right, let's see if I got it right that time. Okay, so here, and a lot of people are confused about this who are even fairly expert at AWS. They think the stuff I'm about to do is allowed by IAM permissioning. It's actually EC2 permissioning, so I'm going to use the AWS command line to hit EC2 to describe the IAM instance profile association. That's a mouthful. It's a simple idea. You've got this server, this EC2 instance, and it has permissions from an IAM role, and there's an identifier of the association that connects those two things together. So I just want to see what that is, and that looks like success to me. And what I'm looking for here is this ID. So, pretty straightforward, right? It says down at the bottom, it's the maintenance role, right? Pretty predictable. We knew this was the maintenance role. Well, here's the association to the maintenance role. So now I need to do a little bit of editing here. And this is the longest command I'm going to use. Oh. Actually, I think I will just grab this guy and paste it. Why am I struggling to copy and paste? I know how to do that. Okay. Let's grab this. All right, so this is a mouthful, but this is the deadly part of this hack. Okay, and it's really important to understand if you have this vulnerability in your infrastructure, because it's really easy to have it, and it is devastating if it's there. There's a bunch of stuff like that on cloud, but this one is a nasty one. So here, I'm calling the EC2 service. I'm not calling IAM. I don't need IAM permissions to do this. I'm using AWS EC2, replace IAM instance profile association. So we're going to make a new association. The association ID, here's the association that I want to change, and now I want to point it to the instance profile name S3 read-write. That looks like victory. If you see right down here, it's now saying there's a new instance association, and it's pointing at S3 read-write. That looks like what I want. By the way, nothing I'm doing is going to show up on any TCP/IP-based security monitoring tools. So we at Fugue would catch this because we're looking for changes in those IAM instance associations constantly, but most things don't catch this. So it's critically important. I'll show you why now. So now let's see if I can access S3. That looks better. Right? Before I got a rebuffed here, well now I'm getting a list. And I want to point out, listing is one of the most dangerous access privileges that you can leave in your infrastructure. Most people don't think so. They think it's just listing. Okay, one of the breaches that happened last year, 700 S3 buckets were drained, probably in minutes. Who knows how many hundreds of thousands or millions of records were in those? How would I know 700 bucket names? By listing them. If I can't list them, I got to figure them out. Well, that really raises the bar on me. And this is a really important point I want to make to you. You knowing what you're running is really important. You having knowledge of what you're running is really important. And you need to think about that as a discovery process because it's constantly evolving and your posture is changing. So the ability to do things like visualize and to monitor for those changes is really important for you. So you need to have 100% visibility, and your goal is for the bad guy to have 0. Right? It's to deny them discoverability, because if I can't discover anything, I can't steal it. Right? So here, we've got our important records bucket. Right? And I want to steal everything in there. So I just did a list. Now I'm going to use a command that you might have read about in a DOJ filing that happened last year in terms of when they were taking a hacker to court, and it was AWS sync. Now, if you've looked at the AWS S3 API, there is no sync in the API, but they use that word, and that means the bad guy was using the AWS command line, which has a convenience function called sync. So we're going to do AWS S3. We're going to sync from S3 important records. Do I have any typos? Doesn't look like it. Good job. I always have typos when I do this. And let's move it to my bucket called all your base. So what is all your base? It's something that lives in my cloud compute infrastructure, not the target. S3 sync works fine for that. Oh, there's all my data stolen. Anything that was in that bucket is gone. And none of that traffic is traversing anything you've got set to watch for TCP/IP transfers. It's not going through your VPC. The only way you're going to catch this is by noticing the API calls. Well, that particular hack that I'm simulating here was not noticed at all for months until the hacker bragged about it on social media. How can you steal the contents of 700 S3 buckets and not even know it? Was that me? Well-timed, whoever that was. Yeah, so how can that happen? Because it's just API calls. So what's S3's normal job? To serve a bazillion reads. So this is just some reads. Okay. So I've now exfiltrated all the data in that S3 environment. So I've got a few minutes left. I'm going to come back over here. And we will have some time for Q&A, which is cool. So just in review, the first thing I need is a firewall misconfiguration. I don't really touch on that too much, but I need some way to get to that EC2 instance, right? And one of the things that you often see with security groups and so on is that they might have been right when you made them using Terraform or something, but then somebody's messed with it since to do a maintenance window or something, and it's hanging out there. In this case, we know that was part of the problem in the real world. So I need to be able to hit the thing. Then I need to be able to get on the EC2 instance. So, often orphaned infrastructure, often forgotten about unpatched infrastructure. Notice that I never rooted the box. Those of you who've done any red teaming or security kind of work, you think about people needing to root the box. I didn't need to root anything. All I needed was standard user, EC2 user, and an AWS command line, which comes with Amazon Linux. Running other Linuxes is not going to help you with this, by the way. The bad guys, if they can get shell, they can load whatever tools they need. Okay, 3, getting IAM role access to S3. So it was a slightly misconfigured IAM role that allowed lateral movement in the IAM network. Some of you might be sitting there thinking, I would never allow that in production. I hope you're right. It can be hard to catch those things. It is complex. And I'll show you why in just a second. And then 4, bucket discovery and duplication. And again, that particular breach did not require, would not have triggered network monitors. It would only trigger what you're seeing in the API layer. And that's why it's so important and why what we do at Fugue is we'll tell you if an IAM role changes, right? That's when you want to catch it. The other problem with catching it from the logs is the data's gone. Our data was gone. That's not awesome. So you want to be monitoring this. So I showed you a little bit. This is not a product pitch, but I showed you, because this is free, you can use it for free on your accounts. I encourage you to. You can just go to fugue.co, and you can point Fugue at your environment, and you can use it for free forever. We have a developer tool version. This is a DevOps conference. Just sign up for it, point it at your AWS environments, and it will tell you if you have some of these vulnerabilities. I encourage you to do that, and also tell us where we're getting things right or wrong. And with that, I do have just a second left. Oh, I didn't turn off PowerPoint, so that was probably confusing. Come on, computer. Yeah, this thing. You can go to fugue.co, you get this, it'll visualize everything, it'll paint stuff red that is dangerous, and you can see if you have some of these vulnerabilities, and it's free forever. So, that ends my presentation. Does anyone have any questions for me? Yes? Yes, the question is, when I did the discovery for the S3 read-write, did I list policies or profiles? And it is list policies. Oh, how did I map that to a profile? With the EC2 command I used, it's just happens for you. So if you've used AWS for long, you know that it's evolved kind of organically over the years. And the actual EC2 command I used, this guy and this guy, the replace IAM instance profile association thing, that's actually a kind of added on feature in EC2. And so it acts a little differently than other things that you would normally think with IAM, like the normal process of setting up, the profile and then attaching the policy. It kind of does some magic behind the hood. And the reason for that is customers wanted the ability to do this. Oh, come on. Well, customers wanted a convenient way to just switch IAM profiles. It used to be you had to create a new EC2 instance to change its base IAM profile. But customers wanted the ability to do that, and so it's kind of, I won't say, it's an added feature that acts uniquely. So that's all I need. I just need there to be a policy. Any other questions? Oh, and by the way, when you think about this attack vector, there are definitely going to be policies and roles somewhere in your AWS account that have this danger, right? I mean, the AWS provided admin role for one. You can't get rid of that, you need it. The question is, are they attached, are dangerous ones attached to things like EC2 instances and public subnets? That's the kind of policies you need to be checking for, and we use Open Policy Agent to do precisely that. Yes?
Does Guard Duty notice that policy change?
Sure. Does Guard Duty notice the policy change? I don't know if it does in all instances. I do not know specifically the answer to that. I've not seen our customers who are using Guard Duty use that feature of us quite a lot. So I don't know what that means exactly, but I'm not sure. Anything else for me? I'll be around till we got one more.
Does Fugue track changes in permission boundaries for like any IAM rules? Like, will it report like, hey, this changed at this time by this account?
Yeah, you can see I had Fugue running while I just did that. And you can see it tracked that.
and it gives like a warning, like in red.
It'll throw a notification. You can Fugue will also you can put Fugue in a mode where it automatically rolls back changes for services.
Oh, so it'll go and correct it if you.
Yeah.
That's
I mean,
cool.
I have to turn Fugue off of its advanced features to do this demo because it would fix it before I could steal the data.
Oh.
So we have
That
this
sounds nice.
self-healing capability that's pretty unique. But yeah, we'll catch all those things as events.
Okay.
Any other questions? One over there.
Yeah, without actually running the command, could you explain the command that you would use to actually get into the EC2 instance and how to protect against that?
Sure. So I think everyone heard it because he had a mic. There's lots of ways. So if you look at common ones that you see are things that are standing on web services that are talking on HTTP or HTTPS that have a CVE where you can get to shell via HTTPS. That's usually what we're seeing, or sadly, people leaving SSH ports open is more common than you would think. So those are typically the ways I've seen. Does that answer the question? Any other questions for me?
So I can see you got my account ID in there, and I'm just in your demo screen there. I'm just wondering if that's stored or if that's secure, or
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear the first part.
is that account ID stored securely, or is that
Oh, my account ID?
right? Well, I mean, I would have to put mine in there if I wanted to use it, right?
Yeah, you just need to, well, but yours wouldn't get, it would only be limited to your ability to view it, right? I'm putting mine on a big screen and people take videos of it and put it on the internet because my attitude is this is my demo account, and I think it's awesome when somebody finds a cool way to break into one of my accounts because then I can learn, and then we put that in the product to prevent it. But if you're using Fugue, only you can see the account ID. Nobody on the internet can see that. It would just be your
Does Fugue store that ID, or is that captured in any way?
It is. As I mentioned, one of our first investors was In-Q-Tel, which is the investment arm of the CIA and the intelligence community. That's kind of the world that I operated in. We are, to my engineers' great frustration, extraordinarily paranoid about how we architect our systems. So I'd be happy, if you're concerned about data security in using Fugue, I'd be happy to talk with you about how we do that. It's a long story. Because it's a complex problem. All right, thanks again.
Let's give it up for Josh. Thanks, Josh.